Good afternoon, everybody. Kyle Broda here from FullSkillsExamPrep.com, and welcome to the next step in you conquering the ICCRC Full Skills Exam, and that is to master the Federal Skilled Trades class. Now, if you went through the Express Entry Procedures lesson, and of course the lesson on CRS points, you're already halfway there with understanding the Federal Skilled Trades program. So congratulations on that already, and we're going to really focus on those little details of the Federal Skilled Trades program, because remember that a person has to meet those requirements in order to, of course, be selected to be given an ITA in the Express Entry Procedures area of immigration. So we're going to really focus on those definitions involving the Federal Skilled Trades program in this lesson. And now, of course, remember that in Express Entry, first of all, in order for a person to be given an ITA, they have to meet those requirements of the Federal Skilled Worker Program, Federal Skilled Trades Program, or the Canadian Experience class. When a person goes through those procedures, which are mandatory, of course, if a person is going to immigrate under the Federal Skilled Trades program, remember that the person will first create a profile in Express Entry and try to get some interest from companies through the Canadian Job Bank. If a person meets those requirements that we just discussed, then they would move on into that Express Entry pool of candidates. Then they would be given an ITA, but there's an extra step in here, and that's what we're going to talk about today. If a person gets an ITA through the Federal Skilled Trades program, they have to meet certain requirements. And those are the requirements that we are going to really thoroughly discuss today, in case something like that comes up on your ICCRC Full Skills Exam. You're also going to have 3 really great questions to answer after this video. So that's going to help you really take all this information and put it into practice as it relates to your upcoming exam. So you have all of these links right in front of you. It's really important to go through all of these. With the Federal Skilled Trades program, there aren't really the government manuals anymore. They've transferred everything to be online. So it's all up to date, and it's pretty easy to read through it as well. So you have the CIC website, of course, which is great and full of information. Sometimes you have to dig in a little bit deeply, though. So that's why we've got all these links for you. They're linked right under the video here if you're watching it on the FullSkillsExamPrep.com website. If you are watching this through YouTube, I'd recommend that you go to our website and see the whole lesson on the lessons page. That way you can just click through these links and continue your reading to save quite a bit of time rather than spending time Googling things. Alright, so the CIC website is, of course, essential. The CIC website's always the best one to read because it's updated right away and it is practical and pretty easy to read as well. You have this topic in your regulations, of course. So that's Regulation 87.2. And of course, with all of these other sections of the CIC website. All right, we're going to talk about the general requirements of this program, and then we're going to move into a couple pretty specific little tricky areas that you should watch out for on your exam. So when we are thinking of those general requirements, it's the same for pretty much every federal immigration stream. People cannot intend to live in Quebec. If they want to live in Quebec, there are other programs for that. There is a language score requirement This one's pretty interesting because it's a split between CLB5 and CLB4. We'll go over that a little bit more in detail just to really help you get covered in case there ever is a question on that. All right, we have an experience requirement. Now that is a very specific requirement. We're going to discuss this pretty thoroughly, and you're going to see this in a couple of the simulation questions that you'll take a look at later on. There's the offer of full-time employment, of course, and we're going to discuss that pretty thoroughly as well. If a person doesn't have that offer of full-time employment, though, they can get a Provincial Certificate of Qualification. We'll discuss both of these pretty thoroughly because they can be a little bit tricky if they pop up on your exam. And this one's interesting because there's no educational requirement. But remember, with everything, all the economic streams that you look at that go through express entry, basically the higher the language score, the more experience, the more degrees, etc., the higher the CRS score. So it's not really, when we look at the minimums, yes, they are the minimum requirements, but if you ever have a scenario in your exam where you can encourage someone to get a higher score, that's usually what you would do. And in real life, once you start working as an RCIC, this is pretty much what you do all day, is figure out a way for people to get a higher score. And finally, that proof of funds is needed, just like in every other stream, unless there is a qualifying job offer. So when we're looking at the Federal Skilled Trades program, and we are looking specifically at the language requirements, it's very interesting because you have a split in here. So I think this is one of the only areas of immigration where you have a split in the language requirements. And we can see that they require, so the IRCC requires that a person's listening and speaking are higher than their reading and writing. I would assume this is because of the nature of the job. A welder, for example, will not be writing too many reports and that type of thing on a daily basis, right? So it's really great of them to do this. And even though on our side, on the immigration side, we don't really work with federal skilled trades people, I don't really know if too many of you will, but it's a good, theoretically, it's a great thing to look at anyways, in terms of course, a person being able to communicate enough for their job. So we can see that the CLB5 is required for listening and speaking, and it drops down to a CLB4 for reading and writing. All right, so with IELTS, CLB5 is a band 5 in both listening and speaking. And then when you look at that CLB4, well, it drops down quite a bit because reading is a 3.5 and then writing is a band 4. CELPIP is, of course, pretty easy to correlate with the CLB system. Essentially, a CLB5 is a score of 5 in CELPIP, in listening and speaking, which is what is required in this case. And of course, a CLB4 is a 4 in reading and writing. Now for the TEF, well, if we look at the listening and speaking, we can see again that it's at a CLB5. So we have a 181 to 216 in listening. We have a 226 to 270 in speaking. And then in writing, it's a little bit lower. Writing is at a CLB4, and reading is at a CLB4 as well. For reading, it's 121 to 150, and writing is the 181 to 225. And then finally, for the TCF, for speaking, it's a 6, and listening is a 369 to 397. Meanwhile, the CLB4 is required for reading and writing. Writing, a CLB4 could be a 4 or 5 as the score, and for reading, it's a 342 to 374. So let's take a look at some of those qualifications requirements that people need in order to practice their trade in certain areas of Canada. First of all, remember that a certificate, of course, proves a person is qualified to practice whichever area of trades that they are engaging in. Now, just like all of you are, of course, going to take your ICCRC Full Skills Exam, that's to become certified and regulated to practice immigration law. And you could think of people who are immigrating under this program as needing some of the same requirements. These are usually handled by the provinces, and you have all the links for all of the accrediting bodies for the provinces at the bottom of this lesson page. So usually when a person wants to become qualified, or needs to become qualified to work, of course, there's usually some training and an exam, and most of these bodies are provincially based. So often when people in these fields are certified in one province, that doesn't mean that the person can work in all of the other provinces. And of course, if the person is engaged in a trade where there is no certificate offered in that province, then that person has to have a qualifying job offer. If you remember from the previous slide, we saw that a person can have either of those. Well, in this case here, if there's no certificate in a certain province for a certain trade, then the person can only do the other option, which is of course to have a qualifying job offer. So let's move on to talk about those job offers. Now the job offer has a limited time. This is interesting because usually in the economic streams for job offers, they usually have to be permanent and full-time. However, with the Federal Skilled Trades Program, it's a little bit different. So those job offers only have to be for 1 year, but they have to be full-time for that whole year at 30 hours a week. And these hours can be split between 2 employers. So let's say you have a carpenter who is going to go to Saskatchewan, let's say. He can have a job offer from 2 employers. Those two employers would team up and split his hours. So he might do 20 hours with one and 10 with the other per week. And that is fine under this program. Of course, an LMIA is needed. And just like every other stream, really, the person has to have the intent and ability to perform that job. So that brings us up to, I think, the most important element to understand about the Federal Skilled Trades Program, and that is relevant experience. In terms of your ICCRC Full Skills Exam, this concept can be a little bit tricky, but if you understand this and you understand those general procedures that have to do with express entry, and of course the CRS points, you're going to be really set up quite well to tackle any question having to do with the Federal Skilled Trades Program that can pop up on your exam. So if you remember from the self-employed lesson, we talked about this a little bit, or no, actually we talked about it pretty thoroughly, and this follows the same theme. So remember that experience always relates to time and role. They're both equally important. So let's take a look at the time requirements that a person needs to meet under this stream. And you're going to have a couple questions, or no, you have one question in the simulations later on that deal with this. So it's going to be really good practice to implement everything we're talking about here into an exam simulation. So when we are looking at those time requirements for the Federal Skilled Trades Program, remember that it's 2 years of experience over the last 5 years before applying. And just like everything else, a full-time job is 30 hours a week at 12 months, and the total time for 1 year would be 1,560 hours. Of course, that can be spread out over part-time work as well. And the Federal Skilled Trades Program is interesting because if a person works more than one job, that's not a problem at all in this one. Okay, if a person works more than 30 hours, so let's say a person works 50 hours a week for 6 months, or he works 60 hours a week for a year or something like that, that doesn't compensate for the amount of months that the person needs to work. So if a person works for, let's say, 18 months at 45 hours, that doesn't mean that the person worked 2 years, so he still wouldn't meet those requirements. And of course, the work experience that a person does only counts after he is qualified to do that work. So if somebody needs a specific license or registration or something like that in the place where they are working, then anything that they do that is unlicensed, or when they're doing their internship or anything like that, that doesn't count for this work experience. And one of the interesting things about the Federal Skilled Trades Program as well is that the work experience doesn't have to have been continuous. So this is one of those great programs where you can have a couple months here, a couple months there of work. And when you think of trades types of jobs, some of them might be based on seasonal work or the weather, because I'm sure with construction work, for example, it's probably a little bit difficult to do in winter if you're in northern Canada, for example. So this is one of those good ones where the work experience doesn't have to have been continuous. And just like any other work experience in any other stream, if the person got some work experience while in Canada, he has to have been authorized to work here. So that concludes work experience in the Federal Skilled Trades Program in terms of time. Remember what we said before, that time and role are equally as important. So you always have to think of two things whenever experience comes up in a scenario in your ICCRC Full Skills Exam. Let's take a look at the role requirements for this stream now. Now you can see in Regulation 87.2, and of course, anywhere you look for information on the Federal Skilled Trades Program, that they always have these major groups. Now these are the eligible occupations where experience counts for the Federal Skilled Trades Program. You obviously won't have to memorize these or anything like that. It's just that you can have an idea of, in general, which areas are used in experience for people who want to immigrate under this program. So you can see it's a lot of construction and skilled trades, of course, for this. And you can see even on the end as well, you have chefs, cooks, butchers, and bakers. All right, so in experience, now that we saw the jobs that people must have had, you can see as well in the knock that the person applying and saying he has experience in this job has to have performed the actions described in the lead statement of the occupation. So when you look at the knock, we'll take a look at an example of this in a second as well. You can see that there is a lead statement, so the person has to have done the jobs that are listed in there. Sometimes people have the title of a job, but they might not perform the actual actions that the knock attributes to that job. Okay, so you have the main duties as well, and the person will have to have performed a substantial number of those main duties. The only difference in here is that the person will obviously not have the provincial certification if he's working overseas. So that's the one thing that they would not need to have in this case. So here is an example of a knock. With this one here, it's butchers. So you can see some of the other names that people might have if they are working in this job. So the person might be a meat cutter or a fishmonger. And you could see the general description at the top here as well, and titles. You'll see when you click on view all titles, if you go through knock to take a look at this sometime, you'll see there are quite a few titles there for every job. But in terms of your exam and dealing with the Federal Skilled Trades program on your exam, obviously you won't have to memorize this kind of thing. Okay, you can see the main duties there as well. We'll take a look at this step by step now. So when we go back to what we saw before, where the Federal Skilled Trades person must have performed the actions described in the lead statement for the occupation, you could see that over here. So when we look at butchers, they say, butchers, meat cutters, and fishmongers, retail and wholesale, prepare standard cuts of meat, poultry, fish, and shellfish for sale in retail or wholesale food establishments. They're employed in supermarkets, grocery stores, butcher shops, fish stores, maybe self-employed, and butchers who are supervisors or heads of departments are also included in this group. So you can see that in general the person will have performed the actions listed over here. And as you look a little bit deeper into the role that a person must have played in the experience area of the Federal Skilled Trades program, you can also see that the applicant must have completed a substantial number of the main duties listed in the description of the skilled trade occupation as set out in the knock, and including all of those essential duties. So when you look at the main duties, you can see over here slicing meat, preparing displays, managing inventory, ensuring food storage, etc., etc., etc. So again, this would give a good idea to see if the title of the person's job actually matches the duties that that person performed. So we've just finished discussing the knock and how it relates to the work a person actually does in their job in qualifying for this program. So let's take a look now at the certification a person needs in order for that work experience to count towards the Federal Skilled Trades program. So in their application, the person would have to show the requirements of their federal skilled trade in their country. So perhaps they need to take an exam, maybe they need some training and that kind of thing. So they would have to identify all of that to the IRCC. And of course, they would have to prove that they met those requirements. Because remember, as you can see on the last point over here, remember that work experience doesn't count unless it is qualified work experience. And in some places, there might not be requirements, So we'll take a look at an example of that in the next slide here. And on the CIC website, they give a couple of really great examples to clarify this. So they give the example of plumbers. And you can see plumbers must be certified in Poland before they may practice plumbing independently in that country. A plumber from Poland would need to show proof of their certification and demonstrate that they have at least 2 years of full-time experience in the last 5 years as a certified plumber in Poland. So you can see over here that Poland or Polish plumbers have to be certified. So they would definitely have to take those steps to become certified, and only that experience that counts after them being certified would count towards experience under the Federal Skilled Trades Program. They give another example as well. So in Ontario, carpenters need not be certified to practice carpentry independently. So a carpenter from Ontario would have to show that they have at least 2 years of full-time carpentry work experience in Ontario in the last 5 years, along with evidence that certification is not required. So the applicant would have to prove that there aren't any certification requirements in Ontario, rather than just submitting an application without saying anything. So that concludes your lesson here on the Federal Skilled Trades Program. Again, a big thank you for tuning in. You have 3 really great questions now to help clarify this information. So I hope you enjoyed the lesson right now, and of course I hope you really enjoy those simulation questions that you will tackle right away. All right, have a really great day, and thanks for tuning in.